You will never make it out of this town. Those 7 words. They shattered my 12-year-old heart into 1,000 pieces that scattered across my bedroom floor like broken glass. I still remember that moment with crystal clarity. The way Marjorie's lips curled into that cruel smile. The way she stood in my doorway, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the frame. The way her eyes swept over my tiny room with obvious disdain. Above my bed hung my most precious possession. A world map covered in bright red pins. Paris, Tokyo, Cape Town, Buenos Aires, London, Sydney, Rome, Bangkok. Each pin represented a dream, a destination, a future I had planned with the innocent determination that only a 12-year-old girl from rural Kentucky could possess. Look at this pathetic little fantasy, Marjorie had said, her voice dripping with venom. You actually think you are going to see all these places? You? The girl whose family cannot even afford to fix their broken air conditioner. The summer heat pressed down on us like a suffocating blanket. Our old house creaked and groaned under the oppressive Kentucky sun. The fan in the corner wheezed pathetically, barely moving the thick, humid air. Marjorie was right about one thing. We could not afford much of anything. My mother worked double shifts at the local diner, coming home each night with grease stains on her uniform and exhaustion etched into every line of her face. My father had been laid off from the factory 6 months earlier, and the stress was eating him alive from the inside out. Our idea of a vacation was driving 30 minutes to the lake with a cooler full of bologna sandwiches and warm soda. But those pins on my map, they were not just decoration. They were promises I had made to myself in the darkness of countless sleepless nights. Promises that I would see the world beyond our crumbling town. Promises that I would prove everyone wrong. Especially Marjorie. My cousin had always been everything I was not. Beautiful. Popular. Rich. Her father owned the biggest car dealership in 3 counties, and she never let anyone forget it. Her clothes came from department stores instead of thrift shops. Her family took real vacations to real places. Disney World. The beach. Cities with tall buildings and bright lights. While I dreamed of faraway places, Marjorie lived a life that already seemed impossibly glamorous to my young eyes. You know what your problem is? She continued, stepping closer to my map. You do not understand your place in the world. Some people are meant for big things. Others. She gestured around my modest room with theatrical disgust. Others are meant to stay exactly where they are. Her words cut deeper than any physical wound ever could, but instead of destroying me, they ignited something fierce and unbreakable in my chest. That night, after Marjorie left, I sat on my bed staring at those red pins until my eyes burned. Each one seemed to pulse with possibility. Each one whispered promises of adventures yet to come. I made a decision that would change everything. I would not just visit those places. I would conquer them. The years that followed were a blur of relentless determination and crushing disappointment. I worked. Oh, how I worked. At 14, I started babysitting for every family in town. 50 cents an hour, sometimes just 25 if the family was struggling as much as we were. But every single cent went into my travel fund. A coffee can hidden under my bed that slowly filled with crumpled bills and handfuls of change. At 16, I got a job at Murphy's Diner, the same place where my mother had worked her fingers to the bone for years. The grease burns on my arms told the story of countless hours spent over hot fryers and sizzling griddles. The ache in my feet spoke of endless shifts spent running between tables, serving coffee and dreams of escape to customers who barely looked up from their plates. But every paycheck brought me closer to that first pin on my map. I taught myself Spanish from library books with torn pages and broken spines. I practiced French with YouTube videos that buffered and froze on our ancient computer. I dreamed in languages I had never heard spoken aloud. Marjorie, meanwhile, went to college on her father's credit card. She studied business administration at the state university, posting photos of her dorm room and fraternity parties on social media. Her life looked like something from a movie. All sorority mixers and spring break trips to Cancun. She would come home for holidays, designer purse slung over her shoulder, and find new ways to remind me of my place. "Still playing with your little map?" she would ask, her voice honey-sweet with condescension. "That is so cute." Most people grow out of these childish fantasies by the time they graduate high school. But I did not grow out of anything. If anything, the fire in my chest burned brighter with each passing year. By the time I turned 24, my coffee can had become a savings account. Not a large one, but enough. Barely enough. I bought my first plane ticket on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Mexico City. Round trip. The cheapest flight I could find, with a layover so long it qualified as an extended vacation in the Dallas airport. The ticket cost 3 months of saved wages. 3 months of skipped lunches and walked miles to save on gas money. 3 months of saying no to movies and dates and every small pleasure that other people my age took for granted. But when I held that boarding pass in my trembling hands, it felt like holding a piece of the moon. I told no one except my parents. They were worried, of course. They had never been on an airplane themselves. The idea of their daughter flying thousands of miles to a foreign country terrified them in ways they could not articulate. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart?" my mother asked, her voice thick with concern. "It is so far away, and you do not speak the language very well." "I speak it well enough," I assured her, though my confidence was mostly performance. "And it is time, Mom. It is finally time." The morning of my departure, I woke before dawn. My stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and terror that made it impossible to eat breakfast. I had packed and repacked my small suitcase a dozen times, agonizing over every item. What does one pack for their first taste of freedom? At the airport, everything felt surreal. The crowds of travelers moving with casual confidence. The announcements in multiple languages. The massive windows offering glimpses of airplanes that looked impossibly large and impossibly fragile. I found my gate and sat in a plastic chair that had probably witnessed 1,000 other first-time travelers. My hands shook as I gripped my boarding pass. My heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird desperate for flight. When they called my boarding group, I stood on unsteady legs and joined the line of passengers. Each step toward the gate felt monumental. Each breath felt like the last one I would take as the person I had always been. The flight attendant smiled as she scanned my boarding pass. "First time flying?" she asked kindly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "You are going to love it," she said, her eyes twinkling with shared excitement. "There is nothing quite like that first takeoff." She was right. As the plane accelerated down the runway, pressing me back into my seat with forces I had never imagined, tears streamed down my cheeks. Not tears of fear, but tears of pure, overwhelming joy. I was flying. I was actually flying. Below me, the patchwork fields of Kentucky grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely. The town that had contained my entire world for 24 years became nothing more than a speck in the distance. And ahead of me lay everything I had ever dreamed of. Mexico City hit me like a revelation wrapped in chaos and painted in colors I had never known existed. The sounds were overwhelming. Car horns and street vendors and conversations in rapid-fire Spanish that danced just beyond my comprehension. The smells were intoxicating. Fresh tortillas and diesel exhaust and flowers I could not name. But the feeling was indescribable. I was alone in a city of 20 million people, and I had never felt more alive. I stayed in a hostel that cost $12 a night. My bed was a narrow bunk in a room shared with 5 strangers from 4 different countries. The bathroom down the hall had no hot water, and a door that would not lock properly. It was absolutely perfect. Each morning, I would wake before sunrise and walk the streets with a paper map folded in my back pocket. I got lost constantly. I ordered food by pointing at pictures and hoping for the best. I stumbled through conversations with patient locals who spoke more English than I spoke Spanish. But every wrong turn led to a discovery. Every awkward conversation ended with laughter and connection that transcended language barriers. I visited the ancient pyramids of Teotihuacan, climbing stone steps that had been worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims and tourists. At the top, with the vast valley spread out below me like a green carpet, I pulled out my phone and took a selfie. Not for social media. I barely used social media then. I took it for the 12-year-old girl who had stared at red pins on her bedroom wall and refused to believe the cruel words of a cousin who thought she knew everything about the world. I took it for proof. When I returned to Kentucky a week later, I felt like a completely different person. The same small town that had once felt like the entire universe now seemed impossibly tiny. The same streets I had walked for 24 years felt narrow and confining. But more than that, I felt the stirring of something new. An idea. I started writing about my trip. Not in a journal, though I kept one of those too. I started a blog. A simple, free website with a name that probably sounded ridiculous to most people. Broke Girl's Big World. My first post was titled, How I Saw Mexico City for Less Than $500. I wrote about the $12 hostel and the street food that cost less than a fast food meal back home. I shared tips about finding cheap flights and navigating foreign cities without spending a fortune. I wrote about the fear and the joy and the transformation that comes from stepping outside your comfort zone for the first time. I published it at midnight on a Tuesday, fully expecting no one to read it. By Friday, I had 50 comments and 1,000 page views. By the end of the month, I had 10,000 followers and brands reaching out about partnerships. People were hungry for what I was offering. Real travel advice for real people with real budgets. No luxury resorts or first-class flights. Just honest stories about seeing the world without breaking the bank. The blog grew. Slowly at first. Then with gathering momentum that surprised even me. I traveled every chance I got. Always on a shoestring budget. Always looking for the story that would resonate with my growing audience. Thailand on $30 a day. Eastern Europe by train with nothing but a backpack and a prayer. Each trip yielded a dozen blog posts. Each post brought more readers. More readers brought more opportunities. Within 2 years, I was making enough money from the blog to quit my job at Murphy's Diner. Within 3 years, I was leading small group tours for other budget travelers who had discovered my writing and wanted to experience what I had found. The tours were intimate affairs. 6 to 8 people maximum. I would plan everything meticulously, finding the perfect balance of structure and adventure, comfort and authenticity. My first tour was to Portugal. 8 strangers who had become friends through my blog, ready to explore Lisbon and Porto with someone who understood their dreams because I had lived them. That tour changed everything. Not just because it was successful, though it was. Not just because every single participant left glowing reviews and became evangelists for my brand, though they did. It changed everything because of a conversation I had with Sarah, a schoolteacher from Ohio who had saved for 2 years to afford the trip. We were sitting in a tiny cafe in Alfama, the oldest district of Lisbon. The narrow streets outside were painted in pastels that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. Fado music drifted from a nearby restaurant, haunting and beautiful. I cannot believe I am actually here, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. 6 months ago, my sister told me I was crazy for spending my savings on a trip to Europe. She said I should buy a new car or put money toward a house down payment. Something practical. She took a sip of her coffee and stared out at the cobblestone street where laundry hung from ancient balconies like colorful flags of surrender. But this is the most practical thing I have ever done, she continued. I feel like I am finally living instead of just existing. Her words hit me like lightning. That night, I walked through the narrow streets of Lisbon until the sun began to rise over the Tagus River. I thought about Sarah's sister and her practical advice. I thought about Marjorie and her cruel certainty that some people were meant for big things while others were meant to stay exactly where they were. I thought about all the people in the world who had been told their dreams were impractical, unrealistic, impossible. And I thought about maps covered with red pins, waiting to be claimed by dreamers who refused to accept limitations. By the time I reached my hotel that morning, I had made another life-changing decision. I was going to buy a place in Lisbon. Not just any place. A small guest house that I had discovered during my advanced scouting for the tour. It was perfect in its imperfection. 10 rooms, each with a story to tell. High ceilings and tile floors that had witnessed decades of travelers and adventurers. The owner was an elderly Portuguese woman named Dona Isabel, who had run the place for 30 years. She was ready to retire, ready to pass her beloved guest house on to someone who would understand its magic. The price was reasonable by Lisbon standards, but astronomical by my standards. It would require every penny I had saved, plus a loan that would stretch my finances to the breaking point. But when I walked through those rooms, imagining the stories that would unfold within their walls, I knew it was right. I knew it was meant to be mine. The paperwork took months. International real estate transactions are complicated under the best circumstances, and these were far from the best circumstances. I was a young American woman with limited business experience trying to buy property in a foreign country. But Donna Isabel believed in me. More than that, she understood what I was trying to create. "You want to make dreams possible," she said during one of our long conversations in her broken English mixed with my improving Portuguese. "This is good work. Important work." When I finally held the deed in my hands, I cried harder than I had since that first flight to Mexico City. I owned a piece of the world. The guest house needed work. Lots of work. The plumbing was temperamental. The electrical system was a mystery wrapped in an enigma. The paint was peeling, and several of the windows had a tendency to stick in ways that required both patience and creative profanity to resolve. But every problem was also an opportunity. I threw myself into the renovation with the same relentless determination that had carried me from that bedroom in Kentucky to the cobblestone streets of Lisbon. I learned to tile bathrooms from YouTube videos. I painted walls until my shoulders ached and my fingers cramped. I haggled with Portuguese contractors in a mixture of English, Portuguese, and enthusiastic hand gestures that probably looked ridiculous, but somehow got results. During the renovation, I lived in one of the smaller rooms, surrounded by the constant sounds of construction and improvement. Hammers and saws and the satisfying thunk of tiles being set into place. It was the hardest work I had ever done. It was also the most rewarding. While I worked on the physical space, I also worked on the concept. This would not be just another budget hotel or hostel. It would be something entirely different. A place designed specifically for first-time travelers and budget adventurers. A place that understood the unique needs and fears of people who had been told they could not or should not dream big. Every room would have a world map on the wall, just like the one that had hung above my childhood bed. But these maps would come with a box of red pins and a simple invitation. Mark where you have been. Mark where you are going. Make your own adventure. The common areas would be designed for connection and inspiration. Comfortable spaces where solo travelers could meet other solo travelers. Libraries stocked with guidebooks and travel memoirs. Walls covered with photos and stories from guests who had used our hotel as a launching pad for their own adventures. Most importantly, every staff member would be trained to understand that for many of our guests, this might be their first time away from home, their first time navigating a foreign city, their first taste of the independence and terror and joy that comes with solo travel. We would not just provide accommodation, we would provide encouragement. I decided to call it Aurora Hotel Lisbon. Aurora, because every sunrise represents a new beginning. Every dawn offers fresh possibilities. The name felt right from the moment I thought of it. We opened our doors on a rainy Tuesday in October. I had no idea if anyone would come. I had spent everything on the renovation and marketing, leaving myself with just enough money to survive for 3 months if we had 0 bookings. Our first guest was a college student from Germany named Klaus who was backpacking through Europe on a budget that made my early travels look luxurious. He had found us through my blog and booked a room for 3 nights. When he walked through our front door, soaking wet from the rain, I felt a surge of pride and terror that nearly knocked me over. This was it. This was really happening. Klaus loved everything about the hotel. The map in his room, which he immediately decorated with pins marking his travels. The common area where he met 2 other solo travelers and ended up exploring Lisbon with them for the rest of his stay. The breakfast we served each morning, featuring local pastries and coffee that guests could enjoy while planning their daily adventures. But what he loved most was the feeling of the place. It is like staying with friends who want to help you see the world, he wrote in his review. I felt encouraged to explore, supported in my adventures, and welcomed home each evening. This is what travel should feel like. That review was shared and reshared across social media and travel forums. It brought us our next 10 guests, then our next 100. Within 6 months, Aurora Hotel Lisbon was booked solid 3 weeks in advance. Within a year, I was looking for our second location. The expansion happened faster than I had ever dared to imagine. Barcelona was next, a beautiful space in the Gothic Quarter that captured the same spirit of adventure and accessibility that had made Lisbon successful. Then Berlin. Then Prague. Then a stunning property in Bangkok that took my breath away the first time I walked through its doors. Each new hotel was carefully chosen not just for its location, but for its potential to serve as a gateway for first-time travelers. Cities with incredible culture and history, but also cities where a modest budget could stretch far enough to create real memories. The brand grew organically, powered by word of mouth and social media posts from guests who felt genuinely inspired by their experiences. We did not have a massive marketing budget, but we did not need one. Our guests were our marketing department. Every photo they posted of their map covered with new pins. Every story they shared about adventures that began in our lobbies. Every recommendation they made to friends and family who had always dreamed of traveling, but never knew where to start. It all added up to something bigger than I had ever imagined possible. By our 5th year, Aurora Hotels had locations on 5 continents. We had become synonymous with accessible luxury and adventure-focused hospitality. But more than that, we had become part of thousands of personal transformation stories. I read every single guest review, and I saved the ones that made me cry. Like the review from Maria, a single mother from Detroit who had saved for 3 years to afford a trip to our Barcelona location. I brought my teenage daughter with me, and for the first time in her life, she saw me as more than just mom. She saw me as an adventurer, an explorer, someone brave enough to navigate a foreign city. The confidence I gained in that week has changed how I approach everything in my life. Or the review from David, a recent retiree who had always dreamed of seeing Europe but thought he had waited too long. I was terrified to travel alone at 68 years old. The staff at Aurora Prague treated me like family from the moment I arrived. They helped me plan day trips, recommended local restaurants, and most importantly, they believed I could handle all of it. I spent 2 weeks exploring Central Europe like I was 25 years old again. These stories were why I did the work. These stories were what filled the space in my chest where Marjorie's cruel words had once lived. As Aurora Hotels grew, so did the industry recognition. Travel magazines featured us in their best budget luxury lists. Hospitality awards found their way to my desk with increasing frequency. But the recognition that meant the most came from an unexpected source. A business journal article titled, "The Entrepreneurs to Watch" featured Aurora Hotels as one of the fastest-growing hospitality brands in the world. The article included interviews with several industry experts, including the CEO of a major hotel chain who said, "What this young woman has accomplished is remarkable not just for its financial success, but for its social impact. She has democratized travel in a way that benefits everyone." The article was picked up by national media. Suddenly, I was being invited to speak at conferences and business schools about entrepreneurship and following unconventional paths to success. It was during one of these speaking engagements that I learned something that changed everything I thought I knew about my journey. I was at a hospitality industry conference in Chicago, giving a presentation about building authentic brand experiences for budget-conscious travelers. After my talk, a woman approached me during the networking reception. She was perfectly dressed, professionally successful, and somehow familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten with recognition before my brain could catch up. It was Marjorie. She looked exactly like what I had always imagined she would become. Polished, confident, expensive. "Hello, cousin," she said, her voice carrying the same honey-sweet condescension I remembered from our childhood. "I saw your presentation. Very interesting." We stood there for a moment. 2 women who had once been girls in the same small Kentucky town, now facing each other across a gulf of time and choices and words that could never be taken back. "I suppose congratulations are in order," she continued when I did not respond immediately. "Though I have to admit, I am surprised you remember our little conversations from when we were kids. You have built quite a quaint little business empire on the premise of proving me wrong." Her words were carefully chosen to sound casual, but I could hear the edge underneath them. The edge of someone who had expected to win a game she did not realize we were playing. "It was never about proving you wrong, Marjorie," I said quietly. "It was about proving myself right." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "Well, you certainly have done that. Though I have to wonder, was it worth it?" All this work, all this stress, just to show off for people who honestly never think about you anymore. The old me would have been crushed by those words. The girl with red pins on her bedroom wall would have crumbled under the casual cruelty. But the woman I had become, she just smiled. You know what I realized, Marjorie? I said, my voice steady and sure. You were right about one thing when we were kids. Some people are meant for big things. But you were wrong about which one of us that was. I could see her perfect composure crack just slightly around the edges. I should get back to my colleagues, she said stiffly. Good luck with your hotels. She walked away without another word, her heels clicking against the conference center floor with sharp precision. I watched her go, and I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. No need to call after her with devastating comebacks I had been rehearsing for decades. Just nothing. The girl who had once defined herself in opposition to Marjorie's cruelty was gone. The woman I had become had built something beautiful not out of spite, but out of love. Love for adventure. Love for possibility. Love for all the dreamers who had been told their dreams were impossible. That night, I called my parents from my hotel room in Chicago. Mom, I said when she answered the phone. I have news. Good news or bad news? She asked, her voice already tight with worry. Some things never change. The best news, I assured her. We are opening our 50th location next month. In New York City. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Mom, are you there? I am here, sweetheart, she whispered, and I could hear the tears in her voice. I am so proud of you. Your father and I, we are both so proud. Will you come to the opening? I asked. I want you to see what we have built. We would not miss it for the world. The New York opening was everything I had dreamed it would be. The location was perfect. A restored historic building in Manhattan, just blocks from Times Square, but tucked away on a quiet side street that felt like a secret worth discovering. The renovation had taken 8 months and pushed every limit of my project management skills. Historic buildings come with historic problems, and New York construction crews come with New York attitudes. But the result was breathtaking. 50 rooms, each with its own character and charm. A rooftop terrace that offered stunning views of the city skyline. Common areas designed for connection and inspiration. Filled with comfortable furniture and walls covered with maps and travel photography from around the world. Most importantly, it felt like Aurora. It felt like home for people who were far from home, and adventure for people ready to embrace the unknown. The guest list for the opening reception included travel writers, industry professionals, loyal guests who had become friends over the years, and the people who mattered most to me. My parents flew in from Kentucky, their first time on an airplane and their first visit to New York City. Watching them navigate JFK Airport with wide eyes and nervous excitement reminded me of my own first flight all those years ago. This is really yours? My mother asked as I gave them a tour of the hotel the day before the official opening. All of this. This is ours, I corrected her. None of it would have happened without the map you let me keep above my bed. And the dreams you never told me were impossible. The opening reception was scheduled to begin at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday evening in September. By 5:30, the lobby was filled with people who had come to celebrate not just a new hotel, but the idea that dreams could become addresses. I stood at the top of the staircase that led to our rooftop terrace, looking down at the crowd of people who had become part of my extended Aurora family. Travel writers who had covered our story from the beginning. Hotel guests who had become friends and evangelists. Industry colleagues who had watched our growth with surprise and respect. And in the corner, trying to blend into the background despite her obvious discomfort, was Marjorie. I had not invited her, but I was not surprised to see her. The opening had been covered in several business publications, and as a marketing executive for a competing hotel chain, she would have professional reasons to attend. Still, her presence felt like a full-circle moment I had not expected. At 7 o'clock, I climbed onto a small platform that had been set up on the rooftop terrace. The crowd gradually quieted as people realized I was about to speak. The Manhattan skyline spread out behind me like a glittering promise. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to set the entire city on fire. I looked out at the faces in the crowd. People who had believed in me when I barely believed in myself. People who had shared my vision of making travel accessible and transformative for everyone, not just the privileged few. When I was 12 years old, I began, my voice carrying clearly in the cool evening air. I had a map on my bedroom wall covered with red pins. Each pin marked a place I dreamed of visiting someday. I paused, letting my eyes find Marjorie in the crowd. She was standing near the back, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Someone once told me that I would never make it out of my small town. I continued, that I did not understand my place in the world. That some people were meant for big things, and others were meant to stay exactly where they were. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several people nodded knowingly, recognizing their own stories and mine. Those words hurt, I admitted. They hurt for a very long time. But eventually, I realized something important. The person who said them was not wrong about everything. Some people are meant for big things. I smiled, feeling the weight of every journey that had brought me to this moment. They were just wrong about which one of us that was. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar that seemed to echo off the surrounding buildings. People cheered and whistled and clapped until their hands hurt. But I was not looking at the crowd anymore. I was looking at Marjorie, who stood frozen in place while everyone around her celebrated. Her face had gone pale, and her carefully controlled expression had finally cracked completely. For just a moment, she looked like the girl I remembered from our childhood. Uncertain, small, human. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd and out of my life once again. But this time, I did not watch her go. Instead, I looked up at the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above Manhattan. And I made a silent promise to the 12-year-old girl who had refused to let her dreams be dismissed. We did it, I told her. We actually did it. After the reception wound down and the last guests departed, I found myself alone on the rooftop terrace. The city stretched out below me in all directions, a sea of lights and possibilities that seemed to go on forever. My parents had reluctantly returned to their hotel room, exhausted but glowing with pride. The staff had finished cleaning up and gone home to their own families and dreams. It was just me and the city and the satisfaction of a promise kept. I pulled out my phone and opened the Aurora Hotels app, scrolling through our locations around the world. 50 hotels across 5 continents. Each one a gateway to adventure for people who had been told their dreams were too big or too expensive or too impractical. Lisbon, Barcelona, Berlin, Prague, Bangkok, Tokyo, Cape Town, Buenos Aires, Sydney, Rome. Every city that had once existed only as a red pin on my childhood map, now housed an Aurora Hotel. Every dream had become an address. The next morning, I woke early and walked through the quiet hotel before our first guests arrived. I checked every detail, ensuring that everything was perfect for the travelers who would soon call this place their temporary home. In the lobby, I stopped in front of the large world map that dominated one wall. It was identical to the maps in all our hotels, covered with colorful pins placed by guests marking their journeys and dreams. But this map was special because it was in New York, the city that had always represented possibility and reinvention, and the audacious belief that anyone could make it if they worked hard enough and refused to give up. I pulled a red pin from the small box attached to the map's frame, and placed it carefully on the spot marking our small Kentucky town. Not because I was ashamed of where I came from, but because I wanted our guests to see that even the smallest places could produce the biggest dreams. That afternoon, our first official guests checked in. A young couple from Ohio who had saved for 2 years to afford their first international trip together. They stood in the lobby looking overwhelmed and excited and slightly terrified, clutching their passports like lifelines. "Welcome to Aurora Hotel New York," I said, approaching them with a smile. "First time in the city?" They nodded eagerly. "First time anywhere, really," the young woman admitted. "We have never been outside of Ohio except for our honeymoon in Niagara Falls." I could see myself in their nervous excitement. I could remember the fear and joy of stepping into the unknown for the first time. "You are going to love it," I assured them. "And if you need any recommendations or help navigating the city, our concierge team is here to help. We specialize in making first-time travelers feel confident and supported." As I walked them to their room, pointing out the map on the wall and the box of pins waiting for their stories. I felt the deep satisfaction that had sustained me through every challenge and setback over the past decade. This was why I had built Aurora Hotels. Not to prove Marjorie wrong, though that had been a sweet bonus. Not to become wealthy or famous or internationally recognized, though those things had happened along the way. I had built Aurora Hotels to make sure that no other 12-year-old with a map full of dreams would ever have to believe that their place in the world was to stay exactly where they were. I had built it to prove that every dream, no matter how impossible it might seem, was just an adventure waiting to happen. And every day, in hotels around the world, new adventurers were picking up red pins and marking their maps with proof that some people really are meant for big things. Sometimes, those people just need someone to believe in them first. 6 months after the New York opening, I received an email that made me laugh out loud in my office. It was from a travel blogger I had never heard of, asking for a partnership with Aurora Hotels. The email was professionally written and included links to her social media accounts and blog statistics. But what made me laugh was her name. The email was signed by Marjorie Patterson. My cousin had apparently left the corporate hotel world and started her own travel blog. Her Instagram account showed carefully curated photos from luxury resorts and 5-star hotels around the world. Her blog focused on elevated travel experiences for the discerning adventurer. It was everything I had expected her to become, and nothing like what Aurora Hotels represented. I stared at the email for a long time, remembering the girl who had stood in my childhood bedroom and told me I would never make it out of our small town. The woman who had approached me at that conference with thinly veiled condescension. The person who had walked away from my opening reception when the applause became too loud to ignore. And now she wanted to partner with me. I could have ignored the email. I could have responded with a polite but firm rejection. I could have used this moment to deliver the kind of devastating professional blow that would feel like justice for all those years of doubt and cruelty. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I invited her to lunch. We met at a small cafe in Soho, the kind of place that served overpriced salads to people who thought spending $40 on lunch made them sophisticated. It was exactly the type of restaurant I would have expected Marjorie to choose. She arrived exactly on time, dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than most people spent on their entire travel wardrobe. Her smile was perfectly practiced, her handshake firmly professional. But I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The uncertainty of someone who had built their entire identity around being superior to others, only to discover that those others had surpassed them in ways that could not be dismissed or diminished. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said as we settled into our seats. "I know this must be awkward." "Why would it be awkward?" I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. She paused, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the table. "Because of our history, obviously. The things I said when we were kids. The way I treated you." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I had ever heard from her, let alone an apology. "You were 12, I said simply. "Children say cruel things sometimes." "I was not just cruel," she admitted, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "I was wrong. About everything. About you, about what you could accomplish, about what really matters in life." She looked out the window at the busy street, where tourists and locals moved past each other in the eternal dance of New York City life. "I spent my 20s trying to prove I was better than everyone from our hometown," she continued. "Better than my parents, better than our relatives, better than you. I went to expensive schools and got prestigious jobs and married someone with the right last name and social connections." Her laugh was bitter and hollow. "And you know what I discovered? Being better than other people is not actually an accomplishment. It is just empty. Exhausting and empty." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated vulnerability. But what I saw was something I had never expected to see from Marjorie. Genuine regret. "My marriage ended 2 years ago," she said. "My ex-husband left me for someone younger and more impressive. My corporate job was eliminated in a restructuring that kept people with better political skills and fewer ethical boundaries. And I realized that I had spent 15 years building a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt completely meaningless from the inside." She met my eyes directly for the first time since we had sat down. So I started the blog. Not because I thought I could be the next great travel influencer, but because I needed to figure out who I actually was when I was not busy trying to be better than everyone else. "And who are you?" I asked. "I am someone who owes you an apology," she said immediately. "A real one. Not just for the things I said when we were kids, but for the person I became afterward. Someone who was so threatened by your dreams that I tried to kill them before they could make me look small by comparison." The waiter approached our table, but Marjorie waved him away with an absent gesture. "I have been following Aurora Hotels for years," she admitted. "Not just as a competitor, but as someone who was fascinated by what you built. Every time you opened a new location, every time you were featured in a magazine or won an award, I felt this mixture of pride and shame that I could not quite understand." "Pride?" I asked, surprised. "Pride because you came from the same place I did. Because if someone from our tiny Kentucky town could build something that remarkable, it meant that maybe we were not as limited by our circumstances as I had always believed. And shame because..." She trailed off, struggling with words that clearly did not come easily. "Because you realized you could have been building something meaningful instead of just trying to tear other people down." I finished for her. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears that she blinked away quickly. "I want to do better," she said. "I want to be better." And I thought, I hope that maybe working with Aurora Hotels could help me figure out how to use my writing to actually help people instead of just making them feel inadequate about their own lives. I sat back in my chair, processing everything she had shared. The Marjorie I remembered would never have been capable of this level of self-reflection or vulnerability. People could change, apparently, even people I had written off decades ago. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. Her face lit up with the first genuine smile I had seen from her all afternoon. "I want to write about accessible luxury travel," she said. "Not the kind where you stay in hostels and eat nothing but street food, though there is nothing wrong with that approach. But how to experience really beautiful, memorable trips without spending a fortune. How to find the sweet spot between budget travel and luxury travel." She pulled out her phone and showed me a few recent blog posts. They were well-written and informative, focusing on mid-range hotels and restaurants that offered exceptional experiences at reasonable prices. "I have been staying at Aurora Hotels for the past year," she continued. "Not just for research, but because they are genuinely wonderful places to stay. The staff is incredible, the locations are perfect, and the whole atmosphere makes you feel like you are capable of anything." She looked directly at me again. "I stayed at the Lisbon location last month, and I spent an entire afternoon sitting in the room where you first got the idea to expand the brand. The desk clerk told me the story of how you bought the original guest house and turned it into something magical. And I cried. Because I realized that while you were building something beautiful that helped other people achieve their dreams, I was still stuck in the same petty, competitive mindset that I had in middle school." The waiter returned, and this time we ordered simple salads and coffee, the kind of lunch that leaves room for conversation to continue without the distraction of elaborate food. "So what exactly are you proposing?" I asked once we were alone again. "A partnership where I create content that drives traffic to Aurora Hotels, but not in the usual influencer way," she explained. "I want to write about the transformational aspects of travel. The way that stepping outside your comfort zone can change how you see yourself and your place in the world. The way that Aurora Hotels specifically creates space for that kind of transformation." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I want to help people understand that travel is not about collecting passport stamps or posting Instagram photos. It is about becoming the person you are meant to be. And Aurora Hotels is one of the few brands in the hospitality industry that seems to actually understand that." Her proposal was thoughtful and well-researched. She had clearly spent considerable time studying not just Aurora Hotels, but the entire philosophy behind what we had built. More than that, she seemed to genuinely understand the mission in a way that many of our marketing partners never quite grasped. "I will need to think about it," I told her honestly. "And I will need to discuss it with my team. But I am interested." "That is more than I hoped for," she said, relief evident in her voice. We finished our lunch talking about travel and business. and the strange ways that life can surprise you. She told me about her recent trips to several Aurora Hotel locations, and I found myself genuinely enjoying our conversation. As we prepared to leave, Marjorie hesitated at the restaurant entrance. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Something personal?" I nodded. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had been different when we were kids? If I had encouraged your dreams instead of trying to crush them?" I considered her question seriously. It was something I had wondered about myself, especially in recent years, as my success had given me the luxury of looking backward with curiosity rather than pain. "Honestly," I said, "I think I needed you to be exactly who you were." She looked surprised. "If you had encouraged me, I might have been satisfied with smaller dreams," I explained. "I might have settled for a few vacation trips instead of building something that could help thousands of other people travel. Your cruelty gave me a fire that I do not think encouragement could have provided." I smiled at her shocked expression. "That does not mean I am grateful for the pain you caused," I added quickly. "But it does mean that I have made peace with the idea that sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest strengths." She nodded slowly, processing this perspective. "I hope someday I can say the same thing about my own mistakes," she said quietly. 3 weeks later, I agreed to a trial partnership with Marjorie's blog. The decision was not popular with everyone on my team. Several people questioned the wisdom of working with someone who had a personal history with me, especially someone whose previous work had focused on the kind of luxury travel that seemed antithetical to Aurora Hotels' mission. But I had seen something in Marjorie during our lunch that convinced me she was genuinely committed to changing her approach. More than that, I believed in second chances. Not because people deserve them, but because transformation is possible for anyone willing to do the difficult work of examining their own motivations and choices. Marjorie's first piece for Aurora Hotels was titled "The Map on the Wall: How One Hotel Chain is Revolutionizing Travel for First-Time Adventurers." It was beautiful. She wrote about staying at our Prague location and watching a young couple from rural Iowa place their first pin on the lobby map. She described the moment when they realized they had successfully navigated a foreign city, tried foods they could not pronounce, and communicated with locals using a combination of broken Czech and enthusiastic gestures. "I watched them transform," she wrote, "from nervous tourists clutching guidebooks to confident explorers ready to tackle whatever adventure came next. And I realized that this transformation is what Aurora Hotels sells. Not just accommodation, but the belief that you are capable of more than you ever imagined." The piece was shared thousands of times across social media. It brought dozens of new bookings to our Prague location, but more importantly, it brought the right kind of bookings. People who were ready for transformation. People who wanted to prove to themselves that they were capable of big things. People like the 12-year-old girl I had once been. Over the following months, Marjorie's writing for Aurora Hotels continued to exceed expectations. She traveled to our different locations and wrote about them not as a travel critic or lifestyle blogger, but as someone who understood the deeper purpose behind what we had built. Her piece about our Cape Town location focused on solo female travelers and the specific challenges they face when exploring the world alone. Her Bangkok article explored how travel can help people recover from major life transitions like divorce or job loss. Each piece was thoughtful, well-researched, and genuinely helpful to our target audience. But the piece that meant the most to me was her final article in the series, published exactly 1 year after our first lunch meeting. It was titled, "The Girl Who Said I Would Never Travel, A Personal Apology." In it, Marjorie wrote openly about our childhood relationship and the cruel things she had said about my dreams. She wrote about her own journey from petty competitiveness to genuine admiration. She wrote about the ways that witnessing someone else's success can force you to confront your own choices and priorities. But most importantly, she wrote about redemption. "I cannot change the words I spoke or the pain I caused," she wrote. "But I can choose to spend the rest of my life using my words differently. I can choose to encourage dreams instead of crushing them. I can choose to build up instead of tearing down." The article ended with a direct address to her readers. If you have ever had someone tell you that your dreams are impossible, please know that they were wrong. If you have ever been the person telling someone else that their dreams are impossible, Please know that it is not too late to become better." She concluded with a paragraph that made me cry when I read it. My cousin built a global hotel empire to prove that dreams can become addresses. But more than that, she built it to make sure that other dreamers would have places to stay along the way. That is the difference between someone who seeks success for its own sake and someone who seeks success as a way to serve others. I am still learning how to be the second kind of person, but I am grateful to have such a powerful example to follow. The response to the article was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments from people sharing their own stories of dreams dismissed and dreams achieved. Dozens of emails from readers who had been inspired to book their first solo trips or international adventures. And one email that mattered more than all the others combined. It was from my mother. "Sweetheart," she wrote. "I just read Marjorie's article about your childhood and your hotels. I want you to know how proud I am, not just of what you have accomplished, but of how you have chosen to handle success. You could have been bitter or cruel in return, but instead you chose grace and forgiveness. That is the daughter I raised, and that is the woman who will change the world." That night, I called Marjorie. "Thank you," I said when she answered the phone. "For the article, but also for everything else. For being willing to change. For using your talents to help other people instead of just promoting yourself. For showing me that even the most painful relationships can be transformed if both people are willing to do the work." "Thank you for giving me the chance," she replied. "And for showing me what it looks like to build something meaningful instead of just building something impressive." We talked for over an hour, two women who had started as cousins, become enemies, and somehow found their way to genuine friendship. As I hung up the phone, I realized that this conversation represented something I had never expected when I started Aurora Hotels. Not just the fulfillment of my own dreams, but the creation of space for other people to fulfill theirs, including people I had never imagined forgiving, let alone supporting. The Aurora Hotels story continued to evolve in ways that surprised me constantly. By our 7th year, we had expanded to 75 locations across 6 continents. Each new hotel brought fresh challenges and opportunities, but the core mission remained the same: making transformational travel accessible to dreamers who had been told their dreams were too big. The brand had evolved beyond just hotels. We had launched Aurora Adventures, small group tours designed for first-time international travelers. We had partnered with airlines to offer travel planning services for nervous flyers. We had created an online community where Aurora guests could connect with each other and share advice and encouragement. But the expansion that meant the most to me was the Aurora Foundation. The foundation provided travel grants to young people from low-income families, giving them the opportunity to experience international travel for the first time. Each grant recipient spent a week at one of our hotels and participated in cultural activities designed to broaden their perspectives and build their confidence. The first recipient was a 17-year-old girl from rural Mississippi named Destiny. Her application essay described a childhood spent moving between foster homes, never staying in one place long enough to feel settled or secure. "I have never been on an airplane," she wrote. "I have never been outside of Mississippi, but I have always dreamed of seeing the world and learning about different cultures. I want to become a social worker who helps other foster kids, and I believe that experiencing different places and meeting different people will make me better at that job." When Destiny arrived at Aurora Hotel Barcelona for her grant week, she looked exactly like I had felt on my first international trip. Terrified and excited and overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of being so far from everything familiar. But by the end of her week, she was a different person. She had navigated the Barcelona metro system alone. She had ordered meals in broken Spanish, and had long conversations with locals who were patient with her language mistakes. She had visited museums and parks and neighborhoods that existed in a completely different universe from anything she had known. Most importantly, she had proven to herself that she was capable of handling whatever challenges the world might throw at her. "I feel like I can do anything now," she told me during our video call on her last day. "If I can figure out how to get around Barcelona by myself, I can definitely handle college and social work school and whatever else comes next." The Aurora Foundation had given grants to over 500 young people by its third year of operation. Each recipient brought their own story of limitations overcome and possibilities discovered. But they all shared one thing in common. They returned home with an unshakable belief in their own capabilities. They returned home knowing that they were meant for big things. On a cold December morning in our 8th year, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was from a producer at a major television network who had been following the Aurora Hotels story for several years. She wanted to create a documentary about the brand, focusing on both the business success and the social impact. We want to tell the story of how one person's determination to prove the doubters wrong ended up creating opportunities for thousands of other dreamers, she explained. It is exactly the kind of inspirational content our audience is looking for. The documentary project took 18 months to complete. The film crew followed me to Aurora Hotels locations around the world, interviewing guests and staff members, and capturing the daily magic that happened when people realized they were capable of more than they had ever imagined. They interviewed Aurora Foundation grant recipients who had gone on to achieve remarkable things in their own lives. They spoke with travel bloggers and industry experts who explained how Aurora Hotels had changed the hospitality landscape. And they interviewed Marjorie. Her segment was powerful and honest, focusing on the themes of redemption and transformation that had defined both our personal relationship and her professional evolution. I spent years trying to diminish other people's dreams because I was afraid of what their success would say about my own limitations, she told the camera. Working with Aurora Hotels taught me that there is enough success in the world for everyone, and that lifting other people up is infinitely more rewarding than trying to tear them down. But the most emotional part of the documentary was the segment filmed in Kentucky. The crew accompanied me back to my hometown for the first time in several years. We drove past the house where I had grown up, past Murphy's Diner where I had worked those endless shifts, past the lake where our family had taken our modest vacations. And we visited the local high school, where I spoke to a group of students about following their dreams despite limited resources and skeptical voices. After my presentation, a sophomore named Marcus approached me with tears in his eyes. "I have a map in my room just like the one you described," he said quietly. "My friends make fun of me for it. They say kids from here do not get to travel to fancy places. But you did it. So maybe I can too." I handed him my business card and made him a promise. "When you graduate from high school, if you are still serious about travel, contact me. The Aurora Foundation will make sure you get the chance to prove your friends wrong." The documentary premiered on a Sunday night in March and was watched by over 12 million people. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Our website crashed from the volume of traffic. Our reservation system was flooded with bookings from people who wanted to be part of the Aurora Hotels experience. The Aurora Foundation received so many grant applications that we had to expand the program just to handle the demand. But more than the business impact, the documentary seemed to touch something deep in viewers who recognized their own stories in mine. I received thousands of emails and social media messages from people who had been told their dreams were too big or too expensive or too impractical. People who had maps on their walls covered with pins marking places they hoped to visit someday. People who needed permission to believe that they were meant for big things. One email in particular made me cry. It was from a woman named Jennifer who lived in a small town in Montana. "I am 43 years old," she wrote, "and I have never been outside of Montana except for one trip to North Dakota for a funeral. My husband died 3 years ago, and my kids are grown and living their own lives. I thought it was too late for me to start traveling, but after watching your documentary, I realized that 43 is not old. It is just getting started." She had booked a week at Aurora Hotel Lisbon, the same property where I had first gotten the idea to expand the brand. "I want to see where it all began," she wrote. "And I want to prove to myself that it is never too late to start living the life you have always dreamed of." Jennifer's trip to Lisbon was everything she had hoped for and more. She sent me photos of herself standing in front of famous landmarks, trying local foods, and placing pins on the lobby map with shaking hands and a huge smile. But the photo that meant the most to me was one she took of herself in her Aurora hotel room on her last night. She was holding a postcard she had written to herself before the trip, sealed in an envelope with instructions to open it only after she had successfully navigated her first solo international adventure. "Dear past Jennifer," she had written. "You were right to believe that you were capable of this. You were right to ignore the voice in your head that said it was too late. You were right to bet on yourself. Love, future Jennifer," who is writing this from Portugal. Stories like Jennifer's reminded me daily why Aurora Hotels existed. Not to make money, though we had become quite profitable. Not to win awards, though we had won many. Not even to prove that small-town dreamers could build global empires, though we had certainly proved that. Aurora Hotels existed to create space for transformation, to provide safe harbors for people who were brave enough to venture beyond their comfort zones in pursuit of becoming who they were meant to be, to offer maps and pins and the quiet encouragement that sometimes dreams are not just fantasies, but addresses waiting to be claimed. As I write this, Aurora Hotels has 93 locations in 34 countries. The Aurora Foundation has provided travel grants to over 2,000 young people, many of whom have gone on to pursue careers in international business, social work, education, and hospitality. Marjorie and I have remained close friends and business partners. Her writing has evolved into a full-fledged media company focused on accessible travel and personal transformation. My parents still live in Kentucky, but they travel extensively now, visiting Aurora Hotel locations around the world, and serving as unofficial ambassadors for the idea that age and modest backgrounds are not barriers to adventure. And in my office in New York, I keep a framed copy of that first map from my childhood bedroom. The red pins are still there, marking all the places I dreamed of visiting when I was 12 years old. But now next to each pin, there is a small Aurora Hotels logo. Every dream became an address. Every impossibility became a reality. Every cruel word that was meant to diminish me became fuel for building something that lifts others up. Sometimes, late at night when I am working alone in that office, I think about all the maps hanging on bedroom walls around the world. Maps covered with pins placed by dreamers who have been told their dreams are too big or too expensive or too impractical. And I smile, because I know that somewhere in those dreams are the seeds of the next great businesses, the next revolutionary ideas, the next proof that the people who try to limit us are always wrong about our potential. The girl who was told she would never travel did not just travel. She made it possible for millions of others to travel too. And that is what being meant for big things actually looks like. Not just achieving your own dreams, but creating space for others to achieve theirs. Not just proving the doubters wrong, but making sure they never get the chance to crush another dreamer's spirit. Not just pinning destinations on a map, but building hotels in those destinations where other dreamers can rest and plan and gather courage for their own impossible journeys. The map on my wall is not just a record of where I have been. It is a promise of where we are all going next. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey from small-town dreams to global success. If this story inspired you to pursue your own impossible dreams, please subscribe to our channel for more motivational content that proves anything is possible when you refuse to accept limitations. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story that could change your life. Remember, you are meant for big things too.